The sun burned low and red across the timber town, turning the sawdust in the air into golden fog as the crowd gathered around the wooden auction block like vultures around a carcass. Men in mud-caked boots leaned on their axes, laughter rattling through crooked teeth, and the sound of the auctioneer's hammer echoed against the stacked pine logs like thunder rolling through the mountains. That was the day nobody thought the quiet man from the north, the one they called the lonely lumberjack, would make a move. He'd stood at the back of the yard for years, a giant of a man with a beard thick as a bear's pelt, shoulders broad as a barn door, and eyes that rarely met another's. He worked from dawn until the last bell of night, chopping trees like they'd wronged him, sleeping alone in a creaking cabin deep in the woods. His real name was Elias Boone. But folks forgot names when loneliness wrapped around a man like frostbite. No one in that crowd could have guessed he'd step forward that evening, not for a woman whose face they hadn't even seen. She stood on that block barefoot, wrapped in a dirt-colored dress, her hands bound in front of her, and an old burlap sack tied tight over her head. The auctioneer barked, $2 to start. And a few men laughed. She wasn't a bride. She wasn't a beauty on display. She was a woman who'd been dragged in from the edge of nowhere, nameless and voiceless, to be sold like a broken mule. Can't even see her face, one man snorted. Probably got teeth like a coyote. Another added, ain't worth a penny. The auctioneer's voice cracked through the night again. $2. Who'll give $2? The crowd fell quiet. Even $2 was more than most wanted to waste. Elias Boone stepped forward then, slow but steady, boots thudding like hammers on wood. His silence made the men part like water. Nobody messed with Boone, not because he was cruel, but because he carried a storm behind his quiet. He reached into the worn leather pouch on his belt, pulled out $2 dollars, the same two he'd saved for a new saw blade, and held them up to the light. "2," he said, his voice low and rough as pine bark. The auctioneer blinked, surprised. "We got $2. Any higher?" The crowd chuckled but no one challenged him. "Sold. To Elias Boone, the lonely lumberjack." Laughter rippled as the hammer fell. Elias didn't flinch. He walked up to the block, cut the rope around her wrists, and without a word threw his old coat around her shaking shoulders. She didn't resist. She didn't speak. She was light as a branch in his arms when he helped her down from the platform. Whispers followed them like smoke as he led her away through the foggy lumber camp. But Elias didn't turn back. He'd spent years in silence, and now silence walked beside him. That night, the forest swallowed them both. His cabin sat miles away from the noise of men, just a river, a bed of moss, and the endless hum of crickets in the dark. He set her in a chair, lit the lantern, and untied the knot at the base of the sack. His fingers were rough, but careful, like he was splitting wood around a bird's nest. When the sack slid off, she didn't scream or cry. She stared straight at him, her face streaked with dirt and tears, eyes wide and green as fresh cedar leaves. She was young, maybe no more than 20, with bruises on her wrists, and a stubborn fire in her gaze that no man had managed to snuff out. Elias didn't ask her past. He'd learned long ago some pain is too heavy to drag into the light. Instead, he pushed a tin cup of warm broth toward her. She stared at it for a moment, then drank slowly, as if trying to remember what kindness tasted like. The cabin creaked with the wind. Outside, the wolves howled. Inside, two souls too broken to speak shared silence like a fragile thread. Days bled into nights. She followed him into the woods, watched him swing the axe, and slowly began to move like the forest was hers again. Her name was still a secret she held behind her teeth. Elias didn't push her, not once. He built her a small table by the window, carved it himself with hands used to breaking, not building. One morning, as the first snow began to fall, she stepped close to him while he chopped wood. Her lips trembled. "Clara," she whispered. Elias froze mid-swing, the axe blade catching the sun. She looked up at him, eyes burning with both fear and defiance. "My name is Clara." That moment, something cracked open in Elias's chest, something that had been frozen for too many winters. He dropped the axe and took off his gloves. Slow and steady, like approaching a skittish deer. "Clara," he repeated, the word rumbling like thunder but soft as rain. Her name felt like warmth in a place that had forgotten how to breathe. He didn't tell her he'd never been married. He didn't tell her about the nights he'd sat by the fire listening to nothing but the creak of the walls. But in that moment, every empty corner of his heart found a voice. The town laughed when word spread that the lonely lumberjack had married the woman with a sack on her head. $2 for a wife. They mocked. She'll run soon as she sees the snow. But Clara never left. She learned to swing an axe, to stitch wool, to smile at the river. She filled the silence with humming songs that sounded like wine through the trees. And when the first real blizzard came, they sat by the fire wrapped in the same wool blanket. Her head against his chest. His arms around her like the forest holding its ground. Elias Boone had spent his life believing he'd die alone in the timber. But love, real love, hadn't knocked on his door. It had been auctioned off for $2, wearing a burlap sack and trembling. He hadn't bought her like a thing. He'd given her shelter, and she'd given him back his soul. Sometimes, love doesn't arrive dressed in gold. Sometimes it shows up broken, bruised, and waiting for someone strong enough to hold it gently. The wind howled against the log walls as winter dug its claws into the valley. Snow buried the forest floor in silence. But inside the cabin, a fire crackled softly, casting a warm glow on two people who had once been strangers. Clara had changed in the weeks since she first whispered her name. She no longer kept her eyes on the ground. She looked at Elias now, straight and steady, as though she'd found something safe in him. Each morning, she helped stack wood, fed the hens, and boiled coffee over the stove. Elias, once a man who spoke only to the trees, found himself listening for her. Laugh like a starving man. Listens for the sound of bread hitting the table. But the outside world hadn't forgotten. One frozen afternoon, hoofbeats shattered the quiet. 3 men from the lumber camp rode up. Faces hidden behind scarves. The sound of their boots like knives in the snow. Elias opened the door, axe in hand, his jaw hard. The leader sneered. "That girl ain't yours, Boone. She was part of a debt we came to collect." Clara froze behind the stove, her hands clutching the edge of the table. Memories she'd buried clawed back to life. Elias stepped between them. His voice was low, steady as a river before a storm. "She's my wife now. She ain't leaving." Laughter rang out, sharp and cruel. "Wife. For $2. One spat. But Elias didn't move. The storm in his eyes was louder than their threats. "You'll have to go through me," he said. The men lunged, but Elias was faster. His axe slammed into the porch beam, sending splinters flying. The sound alone made the horses rear. One man fell into the snow. Another backed away, muttering curses. They saw something in Elias, something wild enough to make them think twice. They turned and rode off, their anger swallowed by the storm. Clara ran to him, shaking, but not from fear. She wrapped her arms around his chest, burying her face against him. For the first time, she wasn't a woman sold or owned, she was a woman chosen and protected. Elias held her close, his breath warm against her hair. In that frozen wilderness, 2 broken souls stood unshaken. And just like that, love became their shield.